Now, please welcome to the stage Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, Chair of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance. He'll be in conversation with Steve Clemons, contributing editor at The Hill. Congressman Cleaver.
Jason, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here after a long delay on Amtrak coming in. Congressman Cleaver, I was just listening to Gigi and Patrice, and they were sort of laying out some of the harsher realities of today's housing market, whether you're looking at home ownership, you're looking at rentals, you're looking at just housing in general. We have something going on in the economy, which is a shortage. A lot of people, not able to even have a roof over their head. And I was very impressed with the conversation, and as many programs that we may talk about with trying to sort of assist and provide rental assistance or provide public housing. Talk to Mayor Bowser here in D.C. This is among her highest priorities to look at how we deal with housing that's affordable housing for those who work and reside in this city. I guess my question to you, and I want to get to your origins in a moment in this subject, but how high a priority is this housing dimension right now among your colleagues? I get the sense not high enough.
I think there is some interest, but not at the level that...
But it's not like DEFCON 5.
No. I mean, it's not like anxiousness to play marbles. I mean, it's just not as strong as it should be. When you compare it with the need, there's an imbalance there. And I would argue with anyone that without adequate housing, without decent, affordable housing, there is very little opportunity for an individual to survive psychologically, economically. And so in Congress, we'll put everything ahead of doing what is required. I mean, the whole budget can't handle this, and then we'll fund the Air Force with jets that they tell us they don't want and don't need anymore. But when you start talking about housing, it's a problem.
An insane price per plane, right? So, but I want our audience to understand why this is such a palpable issue for you. You have shared publicly photographs of the home you spent the first 7 years of your life. I have that photograph. I wish I could show it. When we edit this in the future, folks, go look at Congressman Cleaver's own sharing of his home. And when I call it a home, it was a shack. Would you like to tell our audience why this is so deep for you?
Well, it was a shack, and that's describing it elegantly. I was born in a place called Waxahachie, Texas. My house is 26 minutes from the Omni Hotel in downtown Dallas. Last time I was down there speaking, I got up and drove it just to see. And my father had gone to Prairie View A&M University and got a certificate to learn the trade of laundry, and he opened up Cleaver's Cleaners. Well, in Waxahachie, Texas, was a population of about 1,500 African Americans, and only African Americans would come there, and most of the African Americans were, at best, African American middle class. They were poor, and so he couldn't make it. But so he was able to get this shanty that he paid $5 a week for us to live there. My mother, father, 3 sisters, and me. He paid $5 a week, and we had no electricity, no indoor running water, and no windows. My dad had nailed the windows up with wood and tin. The good news is Texas doesn't get cold like Washington. So, and I don't even remember a cold night in the house, but I'm sure there were very.
I like the line you had there. You learned that warmth in a family doesn't come from a furnace.
That's right. It does not come from a furnace. It comes from all other places, but not the furnace. And so growing up like that, and we moved out of that into public housing.
Right.
And my father worked like 3 jobs. We'd see him only on Sundays because he's working all the way, to midnight every night, so we could move, so he could get out of public housing. That's why I get irritated when I hear people putting down people living in public housing or saying they're lazy, they don't want to work. I think when anybody says that, they are creating their image as one of elegant stupidity.
Right.
And so when I became involved in politics, my goal was to try to reduce the number, if not eliminate, the number of people who lived like we did. And that was not that was not exciting living, nor did it do anything to improve my somebodiness. If anything, it said, you're not worth very much. Because this house you're living in is not worth very much.
Well, when I listened to Patrice a minute ago, if I could just, refer back here, there are some things that came up that reminded me of the former mayor of Alexandria, was a good guy, and was really obsessed with the question of how to get affordable housing. And as a mayor trying to deal with this issue, you don't have a lot of levers. But one of the levers he had, they needed a fire department. They could lay out permits that would allow for multi-use, as you were saying, multi-use homes, build affordable housing into something that had public need, and then found ways that folks could finance it. There's something that, Price Waterhouse got involved with intergenerational financing, which meant between generations, you had intergenerational financing, and various other unique forms of evolution and way to help people have an on-ramp, either in renting or buying a home. I think that's all fine and good. We see this thing, but what really bothers me from your seat and looking at Congress is the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The Great Recession wiped out so many new home buyers or home buyers that were underwater. That hit the black community far more substantially than other communities, the Hispanic community next. The white community largely weathered it, and now we see them at all-time rates of home ownership in the white community. Why wasn't there a public policy response to help keep those people in their homes at that time?
Because there was no will. I was there. I was in Congress in 2008. I was there the day that Secretary Polson came over at a special meeting of our Committee of Financial Services to tell us that President Bush said that if we did not act before the Asians opened on Monday, we were going to fall into a depression. Because I can remember clearly turning to Dennis Moore, sitting next to me in the committee room, and I said to him, I want to go home. I didn't sign up for this. And then we watched the decimation of housing for all across the economic spectrum, but for black and brown people, there has not been a recovery. And so without a recovery, there is no way to transfer wealth. Generational wealth comes, from property, which we're in the rears on that. So I think there has to be great intentionality in Congress, and that's what I've been trying to do to get this done. But we do dumb things. For example, one-for-one replacement of public housing. Right now, the policy of the United States, the richest, the most powerful nation on the planet, we cannot build a new unit in public housing unless a unit is destroyed. That's like room temperature IQ. It is not healthy for us to have that policy. I was in Louisiana and Mississippi right after Katrina.
Right.
We saw public housing units torn down. We cleaned them out, mopped them, poured some Purex on the floor, and replaced 2. And so people had to move right back in. So it's one-for-one. Remember that one-for-one replacement. The federal government will not replace a house unless one is destroyed. And so we can't get ahead like that. And I gave the example about the aircraft because that actually has happened for the Air Force. That we don't want.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, and we said, oh no, yes you do.
I wrote about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know. I guess this will be a non-editorial comment, but I'm really pleased that Wells Fargo and organizations like NAACP are trying to sort of think through the edges of this. But the problem is so voluminous.
Yes.
If you go almost to any city, and I'm sure in Missouri there are some, but I've spent a lot of time recently in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and you sort of look not at your classic homelessness problem in which there may be other public health issues related, but families, essentially, working families who somehow are managing jobs and kids and living on the street or moving from facility to facility to facility, and it just doesn't seem to be on the radar screen of many folks. And I guess the question is, when I see that, I look whether it's philanthropy, whether it's beginning to look at partnerships, but when you have working families that are failing to be able to have a roof over their head, that's got to kind of call out for at least some different form of approach. And maybe it's part federal, maybe part local, part state, but what gives you, I guess I shouldn't say what gives you hope, but what should the partnerships look like to begin addressing that kind of problem?
Well, I think the private sector must do what it can, and then the federal government must do what they can't. And if you mix that together, and I agree, Wells Fargo is actually taking some significant steps in helping. But when that comes together, I think we're going to have success. But there are constant drawbacks because when the American Rescue Act was approved, 1 in every 5 renters in the country were in the arrears on paying their rent, and it was worse for homeowners in the United States. And so usually after these crises hit, non-brown black people are able to recover. It puts us further and further and further behind. And when President Biden, if I hadn't supported President Biden before, I certainly would have supported him afterward. After I had a meeting with him in the White House. It was either his first meeting or one of the first meetings he had. And I was invited with a number of Republicans and Democrats from the Senate, and we talked about housing. And that's why I got so excited about the Build Back Better. I mean, forget all the Republican, Democratic, vegetarian opposition. It's just, but think about, the fact that I sat with the president in the Oval Office as he said, I am as excited about housing as you are, to me. And so I got, excited about the possibility that we had planned to be able to do $150 billion in trying to get housing at least at a minimum level around the country. We weren't able to get that done, so we're back now fighting to try to figure out other ways to do it. For example, I think we're trying to reform Community Reinvestment Act, which financial institutions, banks, they have an assessment and they try to get their credit for it. We're trying to do that, to redesign it so that there is the opportunity for a significant number of dollars in CRA to go to affordable housing. I also think that we maybe can increase the community development block grant program each year. It is the most flexible program of the federal government in any department, so we can use more dollars for housing. And then municipalities. I was mayor of Kansas City for 8 years. I know when you're talking about providing housing, affordable housing, you got to deal with zoning. You got to deal with people who. I got $1 million for a group of people. This happened since I've been in Congress. I have staff here who know the whole story. $1 million for them to tear down a building so they could to do affordable housing, and the city council voted, not in Kansas City, Missouri, but in another town.
Right outside Kansas City?
Yes.
really close to Kansas City?
Yes. They voted no. They didn't want the $1 million
Wow.
because they didn't want to do affordable housing.
Not in our backyard.
Well, because they also interpreted affordability with housing to, I think, race. And so.
Right. So here's the question, and I know we're getting closely on time, but I just want to be honest about this. If you all go over, and if you haven't gone over to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, there's a section in there about redlining. I think it's redlining, not redlining. It's a really powerful area. My former colleague, when I was at the Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates, probably wrote one of the most comprehensive pieces on this. And so, to a certain degree, you had. I mean, look, I'm getting at the age that everything seems pretty recent. But when you kind of go back and you sort of look what this country grew through, in which people alive today saw essentially a large financial crime against a community, and you're a mayor of Kansas City, is there? I sort of find it interesting that there's not awareness, and I've talked to Mark Morial of Urban League about this a lot, that there's not an awareness of the costs that were imposed on particularly the black and brown communities in this country of getting ahead, and that others didn't have that. So you different asset bases to begin with, and you have these areas so I'm just wondering, when you're in Congress and this history is there, it's in the Smithsonian, you've laid it out in the Atlantic and other places, is there not amongst your colleagues an understanding that more needs to be done in these areas, not less?
No.
Why is that?
I think, let me preface my answer by saying, I think God has been trying to help the United States become a great nation. So the question has been, and still is, will we cooperate? And I think there are signs that we don't cooperate. Look, here's something I really need to say. We had the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. We are now almost at that level, the level of housing we had in 1968, minorities. And so, you can look at the Fair Housing Act, the passage of the Fair Housing Act, and look at the decline and how we've been really running hard backward as it relates to housing.
Right.
And so I think we can win this thing. I think there are some things that can do. If the Wells Fargo, for example, if other institutions, and there are some others, who will step up to the plate and say, look, we want to work with the federal government.
Yeah.
And I used some of the earmark money. We're not supposed to call it earmark, but all of the good money, whatever.
Specifically targeted, explained funds.
Yeah.
Okay.
I used my earmark money to help start a housing project near the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District.
Right.
And so a banking entity stepped up and said, okay, we're going to put our money into this project. So now we got public-private money.
Right.
And we're standing on the edge now of building 300, or creating 300. Some will be rehabbed. But that kind of thing, will work. But the federal, remember, I made the decision to spend the money that from the earmark.
Sure.
Congress did not.
I see.
And that's what we really need to do, is focus on members of Congress, doing acting out their beliefs. But this is the painful, ugly thing I have to say.
Yeah.
There is no punishment for not doing it.
Right. Well, I want to thank, before I do that, I just want to thank again with regards to what NAACP, but there are a lot of programs out there that are trying to build financial literacy, do things, I would call them kind of concierge services to help people in this area, which I find so important. But we could talk for another hour, and your team is going to get really upset with me. But this whole book thing that you're doing, American Coup, tell us about that for 30 seconds.
I started writing on
This is a novel.
Yeah, I started writing it on the train from Washington to New York.
Well, you would have had 2 extra hours this morning.
Yeah,
if
I
you'd
thought
been
about
on
that
it.
when
Yeah.
you told me about the lateness, and it started getting good to me. And so I continued and continued and continued, and I looked up and I had a pile of stuff, and I was naming characters after members of Congress. I was on the train, and I looked over, and there's Chase Hotel. We went to Wilmington on the train.
Wow.
You can see the Chase Hotel. So I stole the name Chase and put it with one of my closest friends, Alcee Hastings. So it became, the President of the United States became Chase Hastings. And then, believe it or not, and I know it's hard for people to understand, I wrote this before all of the Trump stuff. I started writing on it, and I was doing an interview about it, and the guy said, well, this is based on Donald Trump. And no, I didn't. It wasn't. Donald Trump had not reached novel level when I started this. And so,
Well, I'm going to go read it. I haven't read it yet, but once I do read it, then we're going to have to do a book event. Is that a deal?
that's a deal.
All right, my friend. Great. Emanuel Cleaver, Congressman of Missouri, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.